أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. ولا تحسبن الله غافلا عما يعمل الظالمون إنما يؤخرهم ليوم تشخص فيه الأبصار مهطعين مقنعي رؤوسهم لا يرتد إليهم طرفهم وأفئدتهم هواء وأنذر الناس يوم يأتيهم العذاب فيقول الذين ظلموا ربنا أخرنا إلى أجل قريب نجب دعوتك ونتبع الرسل أولم تكونوا أقسمتم من قبل ما لكم من زوال وسكنتم في مساكن الذين ظلموا أنفسهم وتبين لكم كيف فعلنا بهم وضربنا لكم الأمثال وقد مكروا مكرهم وعند الله مكرهم وإن كان مكرهم لتزول منه الجبال فلا تحسبن الله مخلف وعده رسله إن الله عزيز ذو انتقام يوم تبدل الأرض غير الأرض والسماوات وبرزوا لله الواحد القهار وترى المجرمين يومئذ مقرنين في الأصفاد سرابيلهم من قطران وتغشى وجوههم النار ليجزي الله كل نفس ما كسبت إن الله سريع الحساب. هذا بلاغ للناس ولينذروا به وليعلموا أنما هو إله واحد وليذكر أولو الألباب. صدق الله العلي العظيم وصدق رسوله الكريم. أفلح من صلى على محمد وآل محمد.
أفلح من صلى على محمد وآل محمد. أعوذ بالله السميع العليم من الشيطان الرجيم. بفضل الله بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على خير خلق الله أجمعين محمد. اللهم صل على وآل محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين واللعنة الدائمة على أعدائهم أجمعين إلى قيام يوم الدين. قال الله سبحانه وتعالى في محكم كتابه الكريم: بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. أم يحسدون الناس على ما آتاهم الله من فضله فقد آتينا آل إبراهيم الكتاب والحكمة وآتيناهم ملكا عظيما. صدق الله العلي العظيم. صلوا على محمد وآل محمد. The worst part about somebody oppressing you or somebody wronging you is the part where they don't admit to it. In fact, research has shown that one of the most important things people seek in reconciliation, one of the most important things that people seek when it comes to diffusing problems and bringing two parties together or two people together is not so much an apology, but they seek recognition that they've been harmed. That, look, I've done wrong by you. I appreciate that I've hurt your feelings by doing this. Not if I've said this and you got hurt, well, you know, I'm like a bull in a china shop, as Sheikh Muhammad likes to say, that I walk around and things might get broken, things might happen. No, rather them owning and having responsibility of what they have done and the action that they have taken. And so when we look at the oppression of Fatimah al-Zahra salawatullahi alayha, and the calamities and the tragedy that befell Sayyidah Zahra salamullahi alayha, one of the biggest avenues of problems and difficulty that befell Sayyidah Zahra is the psychological aspect, the psychological war. That the people who had taken the position of the Holy Prophet, the people that had taken the position of Amir al-Mu'mineen, salawatullahi wa salamuhu alayh, they waged a psychological war against Fatima al-Zahra salawatullahi alayha and against the whole of Islam. For Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in this verse in the Holy Quran, He says, are they envious of the ones whom Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given them from His blessing? Did they not know, basically? Did they not know that we had given فَقَدْ آتَيْنَا آلَ إِبْرَاهِيمَ الْكِتَابَ وَالْحِكْمَةِ وَآتَيْنَاهُمْ مُلْكًا عَظِيمًا, that we gave the progeny of Abraham. And always Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala makes the comparison of the progeny of Nabi Ibrahim alayhi wa ala nabiyina wa alayhi salam, this example within the Holy Quran. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, are they envious and yet they see we have given others of this status and this position? And in other words, do they not know that Allah selects and gives people this status? And this was one of the core reasons. This was one of the core reasons that the first Khalif waged this war against the progeny of the Holy Prophet. He waged this war against them. He waged a psychological war against them, mainly out of envy. That he was envious that Allah had given them some status and he had no status. It is enough that to this day, how many people, for example, know the name of the first Khalif, the first king in Islam, the actual name, not the title, not Abu Bakr, but does anyone know his name? No. So it's debatable. I just heard two names. What I'm saying is, if you ask our Sunni brothers, what's his name? They won't be able to tell you his name. Why? And he's the son of who? Ibn Abi Quhafa? The father of who's Abi Quhafa? What's his first name? Again, same thing. This shows you what sort of or what status they had in society before that. Quhafa in Arabic is used for whatever remains in the bottom of a vessel or a bottle or something like that. And Bakr is basically a camel. And so the point is that they have these titles, but what is their actual name? What was the status that they had? And this is, you're talking the Arab world. We know because remnants of this are within us. Remnants of, I want to say my status. If I want to introduce my brother, I say, oh, this is my brother, or this is my uncle, oh, he's got his masters. Or if we see a lawyer or something, we say, oh, this is al-ustad al-fulani, this is the grand master, the teacher. Or whatever it is, we give him title, we say that this is someone of title. Oh, you know who this is? He's from the family of so-and-so. This is Sayyid Fulan, son of Sayyid Fulan, son of Sayyid Fulan, and their great-grandfather. But this guy doesn't even have a name. So the envy was there, that they came from lowly tribes like Taym and Adi. And because they came from these lowly tribes, the jealousy was there that why do these people have this status and we don't have this status? How can we get this status? Let's steal this status. But subhanAllah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not allow for this. That you can walk into a position or take a position or wear a certain attire, but if you can't meet what this attire entails, then you will never be of that status or that caliber. But when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives somebody a status, it's another level. You know, last week we mentioned Baytul Ahzan, which was the house that Imam Ali alayhi salam, the small sheltered structure that he built in Jannat al-Baqi' for Sayyidah Zahra salamullahi alayha. This small structure was close to where we find the grave of Imam al-Hasan alayhi salam, but it's obviously not there anymore. This structure was still standing up until 1880. Can you believe that? Up until 1880, there was still a structure there. Not the exact same structure, but there was a structure that represented this was Baytul Ahzan. So this is not really that long ago. It's about 140 years ago. It was still standing there until they destroyed the Jannatul Baqi'. But ultimately, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants the remnant of the truth to remain, wants the truth to stay illuminated, the truth is always there. And this is something that is so important. One of the main questions that we need, obviously, is that reconciliation. It's not enough to just stand back and say, you know what, the Sahaba, they had a problem, radiallahu anhu, and now let's move on with our lives. Because this is something, we're just delving into history for no reason. This is the same problem that we have today. The same problem we have today, people go onto a television interview and the first thing they tell them is what? Do you condemn Hamas? That's it. Condemn Hamas and that's it. Someone made a joke. They said Piers Morgan at the dinner table. He tells his family, do you condemn Hamas? They say, yes, says Bismillah. They start eating. The point is that this is the first thing that they try and say, why? They don't want to look at anything beyond that. They don't want to see the greater context of this problem that's happening. So when you look at the tragedy of Fatima al-Zahra salawatullahi wa salamuhu alayha, one of the most important things we need to look at is that psychological warfare that was waged. And one of the things, it's a newly termed thing, but in Islam we just call it nifaq. Basically, this is what it is. It's nifaq. It's pretending that you are something that you are not. Why? Your actions show exactly the opposite of that. So when we see, for example, in the narrations, that when Umar ibn al-Khattab came to the door of Fatima al-Zahra, they said, alayhi salam, they said that he said to her, "Oh Fatima, you are the most beloved person to us after Rasulullah. We don't revere anyone more than you. But if the conspirators don't leave your house, then I'll set fire to the house." So this whole sentence, I think it needs a breakup. That when we look at this sentence and say, right, what's going on? This guy is claiming to have love for the Holy Prophet, and no one is more beloved after the Holy Prophet than Sayyidah Zahra salawatullahi wa salamuhu alayha. But in that same sentence, he's saying, if the conspirators don't leave, then I will set fire to this house. This is something that you really need to look at and think about. And this is something that's narrated by many historical sources. Now, the easiest way for anyone to get out of anything is to say, no, it didn't happen. And haven't we seen that on the news so many a time? This is important. These things are very important to bring up. Firstly, because of this current affair. And I'm sure all of the Muslims are in sadness. All of the people that have any humanity within their heart are in sadness. But it is a time where you can really place the tragedy of the Ahlul Bayt in context. Because rarely do we get that opportunity to place it into that context and see, because we hear things and how easily do we diss historical facts. How easily do we say, oh, it's da'if, the riwayah is da'if. Or historically, many of the scholars say it's unknown what was happening. I remember I was sitting with a brother, and he was from South Lebanon, someone older than me, and we were just discussing certain things. And of the things was the tragedy of Fatima al-Zahra salawatullahi wa salamuhu alayha, and he said, oh, this is something that causes, problems between the ummah and things, something we should, khalas, it's historical and Allah will judge. And then as we were talking, he told me a story. He said, when I was young, living in South Lebanon, we used to go into North Palestine all the time and travel back and forth. Our forefathers used to, because obviously, apparently before World War I, there was no such thing as passports. So you would just travel and you cross the border and you come back. It was a thing. Sure, they had border guards or whatever it was, but there was nothing to say that they couldn't perfectly ID you. Even to this day, realistically, they can't perfectly ID you. If you lose your passport in some country, it doesn't matter how good your Australian accent is, they'll still want to get enough paperwork to prove that, yes, this guy is a citizen, and bring him back. So he said to me, my grandparents used to tell me that, he said at the time that, he said my parents used to tell me that when the Israeli occupation forces wanted to eliminate the Palestinians, he said there was a village in the north where they waited for them to go to the mosque on Friday, and then they gathered as many as they could there, and they locked it up and they set it on fire, and it collapsed. They killed everyone that was within it. So I said to him that historically, this particular incident, it's very hard to find a source for it happening historically. I believe you. I know that this is the the modus operandi of the, and this is the way that the Zionist forces operate. Definitely, this is something that they do, and it's something that's normal that they do. I said to him, but there is no written evidence of this. But based on what you're saying, I definitely believe this. And he said to me, yes, but it did happen. I said, I believe you. But evidently, if we look in the history, the annals of history, there's no news report from back then. There's no news report that says this thing happened at that time. And I said, and we're talking about something that's less than 100 years ago. But most definitely this thing happened. So I say with Fatimah al-Zahra salawatullahi alayha, I said to him, this is the same thing. You're talking about something from 1400 years ago, an event that clearly happened with so many historical sources that lead to this thing happening, that say this thing happened, and yet we just turn away. Why? Because the sources that controlled the narrative at the time and waged the psychological warfare at the time did not have or did not happen to hold these things, yet there are remnants of it that remain. There are remnants of it that remain. Of these remnants that remain, and this is perhaps one of the most important questions that we should pose just before we move on, is in Islam, the Holy Prophet being the central figure in the religion of Islam. The Holy Prophet sallallahu alaihi wa alihi wa sallam, ala dhikrihi sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Being this central figure, how is it that through Islamic history this central figure gets completely sidelined? How is it that the progeny of this central figure, Fatima being his only daughter, the one that we said in the Holy Quran, Allah calls her Al-Kawthar, that she's the herald of abundance for Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. We see that the Holy Prophet has this daughter whom he calls Abiha. She is the mother of her father, Qalbi wa Ruhi allati bayna janbay, and yet historically she disappears. How? She's the mother of Al-Hasan wal-Husayn. She's Sayyidat Nisa Ahl al-Jannah. She's the mother of Rayhanata Rasulullah, Al-Hasan wal-Husayn, the two Basils of the Holy Prophet who are Sayyiday Shababi Ahl al-Jannah, and then historically they just disappear. They are completely sidelined. When we have a look at the narrations, rarely are they placed or are they mentioned in the narrations. Rarely is the sunnah taken from them. Why? This is a question that the Muslims in general need to really look at and ask, hold on a second. This central figure disappears, and this central figure, we can name his lineage up to Adnan, or in some narrations up to Nabi Ibrahim alayhi salam, and yet we take instead from other figures. This is a huge problem. And this was part of that psychological warfare. Part of it was them taking control of the narrative. In fact, when we look at the case, for example, and this is an important case, when we look at the case of Fadak. Fadak being this land that was given by Allah to Rasulullah. And this land was given in a method that if Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alih was to receive a land or take a land without using the Islamic armies, without anyone going to war about it, it becomes his personal property and he deals with it as he pleases. Fadak was this. Someone mentioned in front of Imam al-Sadiq alayhi salam, he said Rasulullah gave Fadak to Fatimah al-Zahra, and Imam al-Sadiq got angry. فَغَضِبَ الْإِمَامِ. He says to him, what did you say? He says, Rasulullah. He says, no, Allah gave Fadak to Fatimah al-Zahra. Allahumma salli ala Muhammadin wa ali Muhammad. وَآتِ ذَا الْقُرْبَ حَقَّهُ. Allah tells him that give the near ones their right. He asks Jibreel, what is this? Jibreel tells him, obviously the Prophet knew, but he's asking for Jibreel to tell us so the people know. It's written in narrations that he tells him, give Fadak to Fatima. It was hers. And she had this. Now, if we look just briefly at when she went to ask him about Fadak, why it was hers, and it was given to her 2 years or 3 years before the Holy Prophet died, before the Holy Prophet was martyred, sallallahu alaihi wa alihi. So then, she had this land, and she had placed somebody to look after it, and the wealth that came from this land was part of their income, but the majority of the wealth went towards the Muslims. Because Fatimiyyah Zahra, salawatullahi alayha, everything in her life, she was selfless. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala didn't select her and place her in that status, in that position, for no reason or just because she's the daughter of the Holy Prophet. No, rather Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala selected her, and He purified her, and He gave her this status as the master of all women, or the lady of all women of the world, and gave her this position in paradise, and He gave her this status and this position on earth. So when the Prophet gave her this, he knew where this was going. He knew that the wealth of this, where it was going, but regardless, it was her personal wealth. She had it. And it wasn't until the Holy Prophet was martyred that Abu Bakr, he took it off her. He took it, he said, this is for the Muslims. So when she came to ask him that you have come and taken this from me, that Fatimiyyah Zahra salawatullahi alayha, days later, came to ask, what happened? This is my property. So he said to her, if you want this property, bring witnesses. So she brought Salama. She came and she bore witness. And who else? Her husband, Ali ibn Abi Talib alayhi salam. So they said to her, Salama is a righteous woman. But Ali ibn Abi Talib, obviously, he just wants the wealth. That's why he's saying, give it here. So no, we can't do this. So then, we'll get to the important point. We haven't hit the important point yet. Then, he said to him, after they hadn't given this, and obviously I'm giving you a summary, Imam Ali alayhi salam, he said to him, if the Muslims own the property and I wanted to claim this property, who brings the evidence? He says to him, of course you have to bring the evidence because they already own the property. The claimant is the one that gives the evidence that the property is actually his, not the one who has possession. The one who has possession, all he has to do is swear that it's mine because it's already in his possession. The other one needs to give evidence of that. So he says to him, of course, you have to give evidence of this. So he says to him, so the land was Fatima's and you took it off her. So we're not even talking inheritance. It hasn't even got to the inheritance stage. It was hers. What evidence did you use to take it off her? So he went silent. So Imam Ali alayhi salam says to him, have you read the Holy Quran? He says, I have. He says, have you read the verse, إِنَّمَا يُرِيدُ اللَّهُ لِيُذْهِبَ عَنْكُمُ الرَّجْسَ أَهْلَ الْبَيْتِ وَيُطَهِّرَكُمْ تَطْهِيرًا اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. He says to him, I have read this verse. He says, and this verse, who was it revealed about? Us or other than us? When he means us, he means Ahl Bayt al-Nubuwwah, the progeny of the Holy Prophet. So Abu Bakr says, certainly it came down with you and no other than you. Who else is going to get this verse that says, surely that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wills to purify you, O progeny of the Holy Prophet, in parenthesis, and remove away you all evil and impurity, and purify you a thorough purification. Paraphrasing the translation of this. So then he says to him, if somebody came and made a claim against Fatima salawatullah that she had committed a violation, what would you do? He says, I would punish her like any of the other Muslims, because he's such a just Khalif. I would punish her like I would punish any of the Muslims. And he says to him, Imam Ali says, then by this, kafart billah, you have become a disbeliever. He says, how so? He says, Allah is saying she's purified a thorough purification, and yet you are going against the word of Allah, saying that she has committed a sin, and you would punish her for it. So then Umar stepped in and said, look, enough. We can't beat you in a debate. Amir al-Mu'mineen, there was no debate. And then this is the clincher. He says to him, go and bring me 2 witnesses and then we can talk. 2 other witnesses, random witnesses. Can you believe that Imam Ali alayhi salam, for something that all the Muslims knew about, for something that was revealed in the Holy Quran only a few years ago, couldn't produce 2 witnesses? Why? It's important. Why? It's a very important question. Why couldn't he produce 2 witnesses? Because the people were not only terrorized, they were beaten and they were killed into submission. This is why. Not one. Do you remember, I told you last week, if you remember, that when Imam Ali alayhi salam, he went around the Medina with Fatimah al-Zahra alayhi salam and Al-Hasan wal-Hussein, knocking on the doors of the people of Medina saying, do you remember the bay'ah of Ghadir? And they would tell Amir al-Mu'mineen, we already gave our bay'ah. Had you come earlier, we would have went with you, but we already gave our bay'ah. What do you want us to do? From door to door, not one person. Not one person, imagine that. And this is the level of psychological warfare that was being played against Ahlul Bayt salamullahi alayhim. The level of psychological warfare, they were basically calling them liars. Imagine that the testimony of Amir al-Mu'mineen, when they take him to give bay'ah, they dragged Imam Ali alayhi salam to give bay'ah to Abu Bakr. He says to him, and if I do not, they said, we will kill you. He says, then you would kill the brother of Rasulullah and the servant of Allah. They said, servant of Allah you are, but brother of Rasulullah you are not. These same people that were there the whole time. So blatantly, they would just throw this lie back. Blatantly, they would say these lies. This is, and in the modern terms, in the Quranic term, it's nifaq. But in the modern terms, they call it gaslighting. Gaslighting, where they lie and they systematically fabricate lies against you to create the illusion that you are going insane. It gets to the point that saying, am I insane? They fabricate so much lies against you that you don't know where to begin. Is this not the brother of Rasulullah? Is this not the man that held the sword that saved Islam? Is this not the one whom Rasulullah said about him, al-imanu kulluh, that this is all of faith, is in this one man? And it's as if, no, this wasn't that person. It's as if that this wasn't that person. This is how much negativity, to the point. Part of that psychological warfare was what? Part of that psychological warfare was them allowing the name of Imam Ali alayhi salam to be cursed on the manabir for 80 years. To make Imam Ali alayhi salam somebody that had no status in Islam. Isn't this a huge problem? Isn't this a tragedy in itself? That imagine that Fatimah al-Zahra salawatullahi wa salamuhu alayha, so one of the companions, he asks Fudda, the maidservant of Fatimah al-Zahra alayhi salam, he asks her what was it like after the Prophet was martyred. And so she begins to tell him how Fatima was afterwards. He said she was inconsolable. This is what she said. She said that from the time that her father passed away, that she would continually cry and cry and cry. This is all she would do. And she wouldn't meet with anyone. You know, have you ever heard when they say that Fatima al-Zahra comes to the majalis of Imam al-Hussein salawatullah alayhi? Yeah? She wouldn't meet with anyone except if there was someone that was crying. Someone that was sharing in the sorrow, subhanAllah. Because the criers were the ones who were with Rasulullah. The criers were the ones who were with Imam Ali alayhi salam, who understood. And everyone else wasn't crying. Could you imagine that it was only days after the passing of the Prophet, days after the martyrdom of the Prophet, where Sayyidah Zahra salawatullahi alayha continually cried, that the people of the Medina, they came, imagine, Shuyukh al-Medina, where did they turn up? Where did they come from? As if they're not in mourning. How is it that they're not in mourning at all? That's what I want to know. That today, when their kings die, they have 3 days of, they turn off the TV, the music channels go away. You have to sit there and watch something sad for 3 days, or 3 days of Quran on their channels when their kings die. And the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and there's no one mourning the Prophet. And it turns out that no one is so badly not mourning the Prophet that they're not giving any sympathy towards Sayyidah Zahra salawatullahi alayha, that the shuyukh of the Medina gather and they say to Imam Ali alayhi salam, look, we can't sleep. Tell your wife either she cries in the day or she cries at night. And Imam Ali alayhi salam, how does he respond? He tells them the loveliest words. Of course, I will ask her. So he says to her, O daughter of Rasulullah, either the day or the night that they cannot sleep. And she says to him, I will cry both in the day and in the night. Why? This is because of the gravity of the oppression. If this is something that you listen to and you find hard to contextualize, or you find hard to comprehend and understand, Have a look today as a Muslim. Have a look today as a human being. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Have a look today as a human being. You are not allowed to even discuss or talk or show any empathy with the oppressed in the world today. No empathy at all. Recently, the health minister was saying that they're having a problem, the Jewish doctors, finding it hard to work because some of the doctors are placing comments that are pro-Palestine on their social media. So they really want to address this and see that, we have to we have to govern what the doctors say, for example, or the health medical professionals say on their social media. Otherwise, you'll lose the confidence of the patients who go and visit these doctors. Imagine that. Today, where you're seeing images and video of chemical weapons, of illegal destruction of residential buildings, of child upon child and baby upon baby being killed. In fact, you know what the worst part is? The worst part is if you say women and children, it's acceptable, but if you say men being killed, because Arab men, we're at the bottom. Arab men are at the bottom. We're the most demonized and dehumanized people. You can't even mention Arab men. You have to say women and children. Have you thought about that? And even when you say women and children, there's no empathy there because they just turn around and say, oh, we didn't do it. We didn't do it. We did it and then we didn't do it. And the lies are so blatant, they're in front of your face. They're committing an absolute genocide by cutting off the telecommunications networks. There's no news that's come out this whole night. Inshallah, we hear some good news in the morning, and they attempted to enter. And on top of this, someone sent a very interesting message. That on top of this, the majority of the people in Gaza are Sunni Muslims. And they are surrounded by 1.5 billion Sunni Muslims. And yet they are waiting to be saved by 1 million Shia Muslims in the south of Lebanon. Does this not bring something into your mind? Does this not tell you that there is something systemically wrong with the adopted faith? A faith that allows tyranny and oppression. Our faith, the Shia al-Jaafaria, the faith is built upon standing against tyranny and oppression. Everything that we have been taught is about standing against tyranny and oppression. This is exactly what our faith spells. We don't believe we need to obey who's in command, with the exception of Muhammad wa al Muhammad. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa al Muhammad. Not some puppet king or someone that's been placed within that position. But feel that frustration. Do you see that frustration that you have when you see this, when you see these things and you tell them, call for a ceasefire, and they say, oh, humanitarian pause, call for a ceasefire. And then eventually, after what? After they've completely demolished everything, now they say ceasefire, and then until they decide when they're going to do the ceasefire. For God's sake, they've cut off everything of these people, and then all they do is they lie. Whatever they shoot, oh, Hamas had the military base inside the cot of this baby. And this is why we had to do this. Subhanallah, yani they fabricate the rules around it. I'll give you one small example. This is just, and the reason I want to use these modern day examples is, number one, this issue of what's happening in Gaza is a humanitarian issue first. Secondly, it's a Muslim issue. That these people are our Muslim brothers and sisters. And if we don't count them as Muslim brothers and sisters, then at least they're human beings. But without a doubt, they are our Muslim brothers and sisters who are being killed in this manner, and it is incumbent upon us to take a stand. Whether it's going to the protest on Sunday and every single protest, because I will tell you why. Let me tell you something. Do you know why Abu Bakr was so confident when he said, bring 2 witnesses, and he knew he wouldn't bring 2 witnesses? Why? They attacked the house of the Prophet. Who's safe after that? Think about it. Who's going to turn around and stand up and say, yes, me, I was at Bay'at al-Ghadir. The house of the Prophet was attacked. In other words, no one has any sanctity. If in the modern day we see that the weakest amongst us, know this, when you see the weakest amongst us, there's a saying where if you want to look at the quality of a civilization, go and look at their prison system. The way they treat their prisoners will tell you a lot about the quality of that civilization. When you have a look at these prisoners in the concentration camp in Gaza, and around them is the support of all the world's powers. For 15 years, they've been feeding them poisoned water. Poisoned water. You can look it up if you don't believe what I'm telling you. Poisoned water. You know the electricity, how they said they cut the electricity? Before they cut it, they were only getting 4 hours a day anyway. It wasn't like they were getting 24/7 electricity. If they placed solar panels, they would remove the solar panels. What I'm saying is they are treating these people in that manner and treating them like that because they see them as a lower class of person. This is something that we completely and unequivocally reject in the religion of Islam. We reject this in the religion of Islam. Whether they are Muslim or they are non-Muslim. This is something that's absolutely rejected. And we see this. These are of the lessons that we learn from the Ahlul Bayt. But the important thing that I want you to understand is, as there was a politician called Tony Benn, an English politician. I probably mentioned this before, but it's good. If I mentioned it, remember it. If you can remember what he said, even better. He said that the way that they treat the refugees is the way that they would treat you if they could. That in other words, the only reason we are left to be, and we have the right to protest. After all of that, they tried to tell us it was illegal. They lied about the law to tell you that it's illegal to protest. In a democratic country, they claim democracy and freedom, and they lied and said to us that you are not allowed to protest. It would be illegal to protest. Even though they have no right, we should have the right of protest. But anyway, these laws are something that they place on the side. My point is, my brothers and sisters, that the people didn't stand up for Rasulullah. They didn't stand up for Fatimiyyah Zahra salawatullahi alayha. And that house was attacked. After that sanctity was taken, no one had any sanctity. Today, the people in Gaza are perhaps the most disadvantaged and weakest people on this earth. The way, conditions that they are living in. And even we see in other countries, in Africa, there's poverty, without a doubt. In Afghanistan, there's oppression. In many of these countries, there is oppression and there is poverty. Everywhere. In every country. But not like this. Not to the level that they're in a concentration camp and they are being bombed like this. No medical supplies are allowed, no light allowed, nothing. And everyone is allowed to say anything against them. But if you just say, free Palestine, they actually tried to make they tried to pass a law in state government saying that we are not allowed to say from the river to the sea. Because this is almost like saying that you want to eradicate Israel. If you say from the river to the sea, so where's Israel going to go if it's going to be from the river to the sea? The same country who has the two blue lines that demarcate, right, from the river to the sea. That's the whole point. But they're not talking about that river, the Jordan River. They're talking about the Euphrates River. They want Karbala. They got jealous of us. And so they want to take this whole thing. They said, oh, we want to pass a law where you're not allowed to even say that. Why? Because it hurts people's feelings. And go and look at what the ministers around the world are saying. That when they tell them that they're using siege tactics and they're cutting off water and power and food and medical supplies, they say, I can't make a judgment, I'm too far away. Are you insane? They're cutting off water. These people can't even wash after they go to the bathroom, let alone drink. And they say, oh, I can't make this judgment. And politicians in the Middle East, a lot of the occupation politicians are saying things, terrible, horrible things. Dehumanizing the people. The point is, if we don't stand for this, or we don't stand for something ultimately, on the day of judgment, this is what this is about. You know these majalis that we come to and the lessons that we learn from them? These are the lessons that we learn. Otherwise, where are these lessons applicable? Please tell me where they're applicable. Where are they applicable? You know, somebody said to me, I really don't want to mention this because it's recorded. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. And I'm not going to mention it. But the point is that the lessons that we learn are this, and this is what we have to see. That notice, this is why they were so confident to say produce two witnesses, because they knew they couldn't produce two witnesses. Because nobody, after the attack, that if the house of the Holy Prophet, we attacked it, no one's house is safe. If the Prophet has no sanctity, no one has any sanctity. That's it. We'll do whatever it is that we want to do. So Fatima salawatullahi alayha, this is the existence that she lived for the rest of her life, for the rest of her natural life on this world. After whatever she had been, after she had been physically attacked and the house had been burnt, this psychological damage is what remained. This control of the narrative is what remained. This deleting ahadith that are so important, that fill in the blanks for what is going on. How can it be? How can it be that this religion was just left in this haphazard manner? Hasbuna kitab Allah. Allahu Akbar. And this is, I want to answer a very important point that has been happening recently. Do you know, we just mentioned the names of these people, Abu Fulan, and we don't know what their real name is. Does anyone know what the real name of Abu Talib is? Hassan, Sheikh. Yeah, the Sheikh said Amran. This is the real name of Abu Talib. Abu Talib was someone, you can see his whole lineage. Abu Talib, the uncle of the Prophet. Abu Talib, the son of Abdul Muttalib. He's from the same lineage of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wasallam. And people sit there and they come up with the worst arguments. The worst arguments. And this is important, and I'll tell you why this is important. It's important because the people that say Hasbuna Kitab Allah, what they mean by Hasbuna Kitab Allah, and this is what Fatima al-Zahra salawatullahi alayha was protesting against. Fadak, do you think that Fatima al-Zahra wanted wealth? وَيُطْعِمُونَ الطَّعَامَ عَلَى حُبِّهِ مِسْكِينًا وَيَتِيمًا وَأَسِيرًا. She would give everything she had for anyone that asked. These are the lessons that we learn from Fatima al-Zahra salawatullahi alayha, that she was selfless. That the dua, this is what I don't understand as well when I hear this. You know the story where Imam al-Hassan comes up to me and says, Mother, I hear you doing dua every night. But I don't hear you doing dua for us. When is the dua for us? What does she say to him? Al-jar, thumma ad-dar, right? We do dua for the neighbor first, then we do dua for the house. But who are the neighbors of Fatima salawatullahi alayha? These same people that wouldn't stand forward and be a witness to her for fadak? Or the ones that didn't stand up when her house was attacked? Wallah. These are the people that she was doing dua for. Do you understand the lessons that we learn from the life of Fatima salawatullahi wa salamuhu alayha? And it was only until they took that irreversible move that she made dua against the ones that did that, the first and the second. And she was angered by them. And she refused to talk by them. As any thinking Muslim, this is important for me to have a look at this and say to myself, hold on a minute. This person who I hold most holy and next to the Holy Prophet, the companion of the cave, Fatima was angered by her. Fatima was angered by him and she didn't talk to him her whole life. Or maybe there's one tradition that says, oh yes, she did talk to him, but she was angered by him. And this is not a tradition we accept. She wouldn't even look at him. She wouldn't give him permission to enter her house and say salam to her. Him or the second. This is important for me to have a look at this and say to myself, what is happening here? I need to find out. I need to find out the reasons behind this. Why has it become as so? So to go back to this, that when they removed the Ahlul Bayt from the Quran, and this was the Prophet's final words. Like if you think about it, any great person, we look towards what was the most important word of guidance that they kept giving us? What was the thing that they said towards the end of their life or throughout their whole life? And the Holy Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam would always say, "Inni tarikum fikum al-thaqalain, kitab Allah wa atrati ahl bayti." I'm leaving behind the two hefty weights, the Book of Allah and my Ahlul Bayt, ma in tamassaktum bihima. If you hold tight to them, you will never go astray, ever. So they decided, you know what they thought it was? A lolly shop where you can just pick what you want to take, pick and choose. So they took the Quran part and they said, we don't like this Ahlul Bayt part much. Why? Because when I tell you Hasbuna Kitab Allah, that means I'll tell you what the Quran means. And that's why they confidently come up and they say, oh, this verse specifically says that the first has the right to become the Khalif and the second has the right. All right, Habibi, where does it say his name? No one asks that. They just sit down and listen and go, oh my God, min al-muhajirin wal-ansar. Oh, this is what it must mean. I mean, it says Muhajirin and Ansar. Do you know how many different people this means? If this is what you want to take it as, verse 100 in Surah At-Tawbah. So I get a million phone calls and messages, oh Sheikh, where's the Ahlul Bayt in the Quran? Where are the names of the Ahlul Bayt in the Quran? I'll give you one better than that. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, إِنَّ اللَّهَ اصْطَفَى آدَمَ وَنُوحَ وَآلَ إِبْرَاهِيمَ وَآلَ عمران على العالمين اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وآل عمران على العالمين. The progeny of Amran happens to have the same name as Abu Talib. There is no translation or hadith that says this is the case. But using their technique, wallah, this is a million times better argument. Million times better argument using their technique. The technique that they use is just saying, oh, Muhajirin Ansar, or this is what it means, or this is what it means. It doesn't stop on, the issue doesn't stop with just looking at the Holy Quran and saying that these verses in the Holy Quran, this is what it means. When I say Hasbuna Kitab Allah, the book of Allah is enough, it means I will tell you what is the meaning behind this book of Allah. And this is exactly what happened. Part of this was the psychological warfare, that they weren't able to get there right. Part of this, as we mentioned earlier, that they harmed the Ahlul Bayt to the point where they make you feel like you're going insane. Oh my God, we Shia, we must be taking it too far. Because where does it say Ali ibn Abi Talib in the Quran, for example? Even the Quran itself is transmitted like the Hadith is transmitted. And we don't understand or comprehend the Quran without the Ahlul Bayt. Some of the verses that, as the Quran says, فيه آيات محكمات, right? It has verses that are decisive and verses that are متشابهة, that are allegorical. For us to understand what these verses mean, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created the Ahlul Bayt, salamullahi alayhim, the progeny of the Prophet. And the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sallam gave the Ahlul Bayt this status and this position that they have the ability to interpret what these verses mean and what they are to us. This commemoration, or the commemoration, of the martyrdom of Fatima salawatullahi wa salamuhu alayha is about unearthing all of these things. The commemoration is about looking back at Islam and trying to find what is the true Islam through the Islamic history, understanding what it is that's missing and what it is that we need to look at. Number two, crying is one of the most essential forms of worship, without a doubt. This is why Fatima salawatullahi alayha would cry that whole time after the Holy Prophet was gone. One, as a protest. Number two, crying from fear of Allah is one of the greatest actions towards faith. And we hear in the narrations that one teardrop from someone crying from the fear of Allah will extinguish the flames of hellfire. One tear. Why? Because crying is involuntary. Crying is something that's pure, that comes from the heart. Crying is that messenger without words. It doesn't need words. The tears speak more than the words possibly could. And this is why Fatima salawatullahi alayha started this important sunnah. In fact, it's a sunnah of the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wasallam. But this sunnah, this tradition that we see from Fatima salawatullahi alayha went on and on. This one that she had taken from the Holy Prophet. For the Holy Prophet himself, sallallahu alaihi wa alihi, would cry and lament and mourn the what would befall his Ahlul Bayt after him. He would sit down and he would cry and look at Al-Hasan al-Hussein, and this is something that I had mentioned in the last week. And the Prophet would look at them and he would see what was to befall them, and he would cry over what it is that was going to befall his beloved daughter and his progeny afterwards. That these problems and these calamities that would befall them, but the beauty within it was there was salvation for the ummah, for the whole nation. In seeing that the way that the Ahlul Bayt went through these tragedies and these calamities, in a way they were empathizing with the difficulties that we would go through within our lives. And us being able to commemorate these and cry over these, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would elevate our status and He would forgive us for our sins, inshaAllah, and He would purify our hearts through these tears. Before we finish, I just want to mention the importance of having this wilaya of Muhammad wa al Muhammad, Allahumma salli ala Muhammadin wa ali Muhammad. And I do not want to take too much of your time, but the importance of this is basically what we learn from the Ahlul Bayt. For us gathering and crying and feeling this empathy and this emotion towards the Ahlul Bayt, it basically creates a bond of love with the Ahlul Bayt. And when you have that love of the Ahlul Bayt, obviously the opposite is to have the disassociation of the enemies of the Ahlul Bayt. But ultimately to have this love is to adopt their sunan, to adopt their tradition and the things that they do. Fatima salawatullahi wa salamuhu alayha, we mentioned that her dua was for everyone. We mentioned that she would look for the poor and the needy, and this is who she would give to. And we mentioned the importance, and this is something as a take-home point, of the hijab when it came to Fatima salawatullahi alayha. That they say that when Fatima al-Zahra wanted to go and challenge Abu Bakr for the attack on the house, for her being harmed and hurt, for her rib being broken, for the Muhsin being miscarried, for the bruises on her arms and her face, for them dragging Imam Ali alayhi salam from his house, they say that she placed her hijab upon her head, and then she covered with the jilbab over the top of everything else, and then she gathered with a group of her women. And she went out towards Masjid Rasulullah, which is just outside her house. And then when she entered there, she told them to build a partition. And this partition was of cloth between all of these women. So the importance of hijab, that Sayyidah Zahra, or the emphasis that she placed on hijab, was she covered herself, and then she surrounded herself with women, and then she placed a partition. Imagine that. And this was just to go from her house into Masjid Rasulullah. This is a very important lesson within this. The importance about us having that concern and that care for hijab. Because the hijab is wajib obviously in religion, but it is an important part of your faith for our women folk. For them to take care of their hijab and look after their hijab. This lecture tonight is not about hijab. But I'm saying this is of the things that we take from these actions of Fatima salawatullahi alayha. And at the same time, of the things is that Fatima salawatullahi alayha would never sit down to falsehood. Rather, she stood up and she faced the falsehood. And she spoke what was to be true at the time that it was necessary for her to speak what is true. And she gave her famous sermon, Al-Khutbah al-Fadakiyah, where she began to describe the elements of the faith and to talk about the importance of what had been taken away from her and what had been taken away from the whole Islamic ummah. In fact, she was so concerned with her hijab and so concerned with the whole Islamic nation that she, rather than making dua upon all of them, which she had the ability to, she did not. She did not make the dua and seek for the destruction of everyone. On the contrary, Fatima salawatullahi wa salamuhu alayha, she made dua for these people that tried to, she made dua, for the Muslims, and she asks Allah in this world and in the hereafter, we have in the hadith, to give her the ability of intercession of the people that love Fatima salawatullahi alayha, or of the people that do good to others. For the love of Fatima salawatullahi alayha, she intercedes on behalf of these people and takes them into paradise. However, when she knew that it was going to be time for her to leave this world, Fatima salawatullahi wa salamuhu alayha, they say that after the Prophet died, she never was seen laughing, not once. That her face was always in tears and she was always crying. And so she told her servant, she said to her that it's going to be time for me to go, to leave this world soon. And my body has become so weary and thin from my sadness and my anguish. When they place my body, when they place the kafan on my body, or when I place the kafan on my body and they carry my body, I do not want the shape of my body to be seen. Do you have a solution for this? She says, yes, I have seen the people, the ahbash, the people in Africa, what they do is they build a coffin. And this sort of structure, the na'ash that has been built, this is where it began. The first na'ash that was built was for Fatima salawatullahi wa salamuhu alayha out of palm leaves. Why? So people would not recognize or see the shape of her body. Please turn off the lights. And so when Fatima salawatullahi alayha, she had this constructed for her, for the time for when she was going to be taken away to be buried. At that time, Fatima al-Zahra salawatullahi wa salamuhu alayha, she got ready to leave this world. And she told her servant that if you hear me, I will be reciting Quran in the other room, and if you hear that I stopped reciting Quran, then know that my soul has left. And yet Amir al-Mu'mineen and Al-Hasan and Al-Hussein were not there for these moments. They were still at the masjid. Fatima al-Zahra was in her house and they had not known of her condition. So when she hears, Asma hears Fatima al-Zahra salawatullahi alayha reciting the Holy Quran, she continues to recite and recite until finally she doesn't hear her voice anymore, so she runs to see that Fatima salawatullahi alayha has left this world. She calls and sends a messenger to Amir al-Mu'mineen and Al-Hasan and Al-Hussein, come back to see the state and the condition of their mother. After Amir al-Mu'mineen salawatullahi wa salamu alayhi prepares her for burial, Al-Hasan and Al-Hussein enter the room where Fatima is laying in to say goodbye to her one last time. And how many of these farewells have we seen recently of children and parents farewelling their parents or farewelling their children? Imagine Fatima salawatullahi alayha, and she lays there lifeless, and Al-Hasan wal Hussein come next to her and they begin to cry as they come near her. One of the narrators says that Fatima salawatullahi alayha, she leaned towards Abu Abdullah al-Hussein. The angels came down and they said to Amir al-Mu'mineen, take Al-Hasan wal Hussein away from Fatima, for she has made the angels of the Arsh begin to weep by saying Abu Abdullah al-Hussein at the side of his mother. When Amir al-Mu'mineen, he picks up Fatima salawatullahi alayha and he takes her for a burial at night. Imagine the most prominent figure after the Holy Prophet is not able to have a funeral during the day, that Amir al-Mu'mineen must take her at night and bury her in secret. Why? She says, I will not allow any of my oppressors to attend my funeral. Let this be a message to all of the Muslims to the day of judgment, that Fatima, the daughter of Rasulullah, was oppressed. When Amir al-Mu'mineen places Fatima down into the earth, he sits there and he begins to cry that he has lost his soulmate. He has lost the person that was most dear to him in this life. When he places her down, he says, he recites a small poem that is attributed to him. He says to her that I wish, he says that I have held myself, it's like I am holding my soul in. I wish my soul would be removed with my breath. He says, I do not cry for you, but I cry that the days will be long and I will live long after you. It's like he falls asleep a little bit. And when he falls asleep, he sees Fatima in his dream. Fatima comes to him and she says, awaken, O Amir al-Mu'mineen. It's like I hear the crying of Zainab, that she has awoken in the middle of the night and she misses her mother. A young girl can't be without her mother and I can't be there for her. Oh, Amir al-Mu'mineen, return to Sayyidah Zainab salawatullahi wa salamuhu alayha. When Amir al-Mu'mineen returns to the house, he comforts Zainab. The daughter needs her father more than anything. For a child, the father represents protection, he represents everything. But how will it be, Amir al-Mu'mineen, when your Zainab is alone on the plains of Karbala, looking after these children that are all around her, without nobody to stand by her side to help her, without an Abu al-Fadl al-Abbas, without her brother Abu Abdullah al-Hussein, and to be taken under the guardianship of the enemy. وَسَيَعْلَمُ الَّذِينَ ظَلَمُوا أَيَّ مُنْقَلَبٍ يَنْقَلِبُونَ وَالْعَاقِبَةُ لِلْمُتَّقِينَ.
مأجورين إن شاء الله، أجركم على السيدة الزهراء. ويلي عالزهراء المظلومة، ويلي عالزهراء المظلومة، عاشت وماتت مهضومة عاشت وماتت مهضومة. لو تسوون صفوف بارك الله بيك. وما عاشت وماتت مهضومة نخوة يا اختي الرضا المعصومة نخوة يا اختي الرضا المعصوم نخوة يا اختي الرضا المعصومة نخوة يا اختي الرضا على بابك يا الجليلة واقفين عندنا حاجات وانتي تعرفين وهالقسم يا فاطمة بجاه الحسين وجاه عباس الوقع بالحومة نخوة يا اختي الرضا المعصومة ما شاء الله نخوة يا تنقضي حاجاتنا كلنا نريد نخوة بالمظلوم ابو اليمة الشهيد بالعزيز حسين مقطوع الوريد بجاه نحر الطاهر بدمومه نخوة يا اختي الرضا ما شاء الله نخوة يا اختي الرضا هذه ايامك وايام البتول رافعين جفوفنا بمدمع همول يا متى لصحنك يا مولاتي الوصول يا متى لصحنك يا مولاتي الوصول بجاه امك فاطمة المظلومة نخوة يا اختي الرضا ما شاء الله نخوة يا اختي الرضا اشكي لك احوالي وانتي العالمة فاطمة يا فاطمة يا فاطمة وياها فاطمة يا فاطمة اقسم بهامة علي وفيض الدماء بجاه امير المؤمنين ويومه نخوة يا اختي الرضا ما شاء الله نخوة تعال تفضل هنا سوي صفوف سوي صفوف واحد قبال الثاني انتخي باسمك ونادي بدمعتي انتخي باسمك ونادي بدمعتي فاطمة المعصومة عندك حاجتي فاطمة المعصومة عندك حاجتي وطلبي من الله يفرج شدتي وطلبي من الله يفرج شدتي بالحسن وبكبدته المسمومة نخوة يا اختي الرضا ما شاء الله نخوة يا اختي الرضا انت معروفة ترى وقت الشداد الشاعر حسن آل بخضر غاتي انت معروفة ترى بوقت الشداد وعندي انا بيك والله معتقد فاطمة يا فاطمة نطلب مدد، فاطمة يا فاطمة بعد مرة، فاطمة يا فاطمة نطلب بالزكية الطاهرة المهضومة، نخوة يا اختي الرضا، نخوة يا ما رويت كسر ضلعي خفيت، ما رويت المهد خالي ومحسن، ما رويت المهد خالي ومحسن، ما رويت الخبر خليته سكته، ما رويته وعلى حيدر لحد يوم المنية، هي على حيدر لحد يوم المنية، حملها القلب يا دهر لوعات، حملها الزهرة تلوج من صابا، حملها ياهو من العرب يفزع، شبه أزلام ياهو من العرب يفزع، حملها ويرد كل من تعدى على الزكية، ويرد كل من تعدى على الزكية، نبت بسمار بضلوعي وصحيت ندبت المصطفى طه وصحت لو أن تسأل على حالي وصحيت ذب العود ودنت من المنية، يا ذب العود ودنت مني المنية. الشاعر حيدر الدراجي، هاي يا الحرة هاي وصيتي، هاي تكتبها جمرة دمعتي، هاي ليلة وفاتي ودفنتي. يا زينب يا زينب موفقين إن شاء الله، أجركم على السيدة الزهراء والسيدة المعصومة ليالي الفاطمية. نسأل الله سبحانه وتعالى أن ينصرنا وينصر المسلمين في هذه الأيام وفي هذه الساعات بفضل الصلاة على محمد وآل محمد. هاي يا الحرة هاي وصيتي، هاي تكتبها جمرة دمعتي، هاي ليلة وفاتي ودفنتي. يا زينب يا زينب ما شاء الله، هاي يا الحرة هاي وصيتي، هاي تكتبها جمرة دمعتي، هاي ليلة وفاتي ودفنتي. يا زينب بعد مرة هاي الحرة هاي وصيتي، هاي تكتبها جمرة دمعتي، هاي ليلة وفاتي ودفنتي. هاي وعمري كله 18. هذا آخر يوم لي وعمري كله 18. بعد يمك ما أنامن راح أنامن بالنعش راح أنام. وبعد يمك ما أنامن راح أنامن بالنعش راح أنام. هذا النص غاتي. يما وصيتش بوصية، يما وصيتش بوصية، من يمر يوم العطش، من يمر يوم العطش، من يظل حسيني وحده وبالدمى دربا فرش، وبالدمى درب حيل ضمي على ضلعك عبرته، حيل شمي لي صدره بغربته، حيل من نحره قبل ذبحته يا زينب. هاي هاي شيل ايدك شيل ايدك، اليوم اوديك الكربلاء. الله هاي ليلة وفاتي ودفنتي، يمة تنتظرك مصايب ينكسر منها الظهر، يمة تنتظرك مصايب ينكسر منها الظهر. شدي حيلك يا العقيلة يا جبل من الصبور، يا جبل على صدر حسين خيك يما يقعد الشمر. على صدر حسين خيك يما يقعد الشمر، و12 طابره يطبره من يحز بدا النحار. نار تلهب يا يما بخيمتك، نار تجويها جمرة دمعتك، نار ترسم ملامح غربتك يا زينب. هاي هاي ليلة وفاتي ودفنتي، شفتي فوق الوجنة لطمة تطفح بجمر الدمى. الشاعر حسن الموالي الفاطمي. شفتي فوق الوجنة لطمة تطفح بجمر الدمى، صعبة بعيونك يا حرة ينسطر خد السما، ينسطر خد السما. خلف باب الغاضرية 1000 سطرة بفاطمة، وخلف باب الغاضرية 1000 سطرة بفاطمة. والعطش بسماره يلهب يهشم بكبد الظما، يهشم بكبد الظما. من نحر اخوك الدم يدر، طبعت حوافر عالصدر، تهضمني ضحكة الشمر يا زينب. هاي هاي
يا الحرة هاي وصيتي، هاي تكتبها جمرة دمعتي،
ليلة وفاتي ودفنتي. يا هضيم ما مثلها لو مشيتي ويا الغرب، يما حملي هالمصيبة هالدرب كلش صعوب، وهالدرب غربة وجروح ويتامى عبرة واحزان وضرب، غربة وجروح ويتامى عبرة واحزان وضرب، ورقية دم ذنها ترك دمعة على الدرب، ورقية دم ذنها ترك دمعة على الدرب. ليش تنشد يا عمه انصفع، ليه تنشد يا عمه انصفع، ليه شو راح ابويا وما رجع، ليش الصوت شو ما حد سمع يا زينب، هاي هاي وصيتي
تكتبها جمرة دمعتي،
هاي
وفاتي ودفنتي
يا زينب. أنا يوم الطف أحضره بس أظل على المشرعة. ليش يا سيدتي أنا يوم الطف أحضره بس أظل على المشرعة، يما أخوك الرابع أحضر بيدي جسمه أجمعه، بيدي جسمه كنيته بدر الهواشم نشمي طاهر منبعه، كنيته بدر الهواشم نشمي طاهر منبعه، أمه تهدي يما لبني البنين الأربعة، البنين أمه تهدي يما لبني البنين الأربعة، البنين نور نوري وتشع بحضرتك نور، أم البنين بخدمتك نور، حرة وتنشف دمعتك يا زينب، هاي زينب. هذا فجري وداعي أسفر لابس ثياب الظلام، شدي حيلك يا الحبيبة يما يا بنت الكرام، يما يا خلى شمع طريق يا يمه واغفى باحضانك وانام، خلى شمع طريق يا يمه واغفى باحضانك وانام، ومنك اشتم بالقيامه يمه عطاب الخيام، منك اشتم بالقيامه يمه عطاب الخيام. راح العمر لا ما يرد، راح اليوم المنية استعد، راح جرح المصيبة ينولد يا زينب. آخر جوابها هاي ليلة وفاتي ودفنتي، خادم وممنون. هذا فجري وداعي أسفر لابس ثياب الظلام، وشدي حيلك يا الحبيبة يما يا بنت الكرام، يما يا اي خلى شمع طريج يا يمه واغفى باحضانك وانا ومنك اشتم بالقيامه يمه عطاب الخيام يمه عطاب الخيام راح العمر لا ما يرد راح اليوم المنيه استعد راح جرح المصيبة ينولد يا زينب يا زينب فاطميون صرخنا فاطميون صرخ فاطميون صرخنا فاطمي أعلى فاطمي الله فاطميون وصرخنا يا لثارج فاطمة فاطميون وصرخنا يا لثارج فاطمة ما نجامل عالظلامة وصوتنا يدق بالسمة ما نجامل عالظلامة وصوتنا يدق بالسمة نقسم بدمعة الزهرة وبعلي حامل حمة نقسم بدمعة الزهرة وبعلي حامل حمة فدوى من يخلص عمرنا لاجل شي يسيل الدمه فدوى من يخلص عمر لاجل شي يسيل الدمه فاطميون صرخ فاطميون صرخ أعلى فاطميون صرخنا الله انفضحت أسرار العصابة العيشة وفاطم قهر فضحت أسرار العصابة العيشة وفاطم قهر تنوح من كسرة ضلعها وليلها تخلص سهر تنوح من كسرة ضلعها وليلها تخلص سهر دموعها تبات على خدها يا علي مثل النهر دموعها تبات على خدها يا علي مثل النهر فاطميون صرخنا فاطمي بعد فاطميون صر الله انفضحت أسرار العصاب عيشة وفاطم قهر فضحت أسرار العصاب عيشة وفاطم قهر تنوح من كسرة ضلعها وليلها تخلص سهر دموعها تبات على خدها يا علي مثل النهار فاطميون صرخنا فاطميون بعد فاطمي وين الفاطمي هلا الله حدد الموقف بكلمة وصير وي فاطم عرف حدد الموقف بكلمة وصير وي فاطم عرف دير بالك وي عدوها تروح يوم وتنجرف دير بالك وي عدوها تروح يوم وتنجرف الصلاة بطل تراها من قبلتك تنحرف الصلاة بطل تراها من قبلتك تنحرف بدون مرضات الزكية لو جبينك ينخسف بدون مرضات الزكية لو جبينك ينخسف فاطميون صرخنا ما شاء الله فاطميون بعد فاطميون الله شهر قم در غم داغ تو چنان عاشورا شهر قم در غم داغ تو چنان عاشورا هر کجا می نگری از غم تو کرب و بلاست هر کجا می نگری از غم تو کرب و بلا ناله شیعه تو در غم تو و ویلاست ناله شیعه تو در غم تو و ویلا فاطمیون خادم فاطميون الله شهر قم در غم داغ تو چنان عاشورا شهر قم در غم داغ تو چنان عاشورا هر کجا می نگری از غم تو کرب و بلا ناله شیعه تو در غم تو و ویلاست ناله شیعه تو در غم تو و ویلا فاطمیون فاطمی الله 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 واهل البيت كلهم لعنة والكانوا سبب. الله واهل البيت كلهم لعنة والكان السبب. روح اقرا الكتب كلها شوف عنهم شن كتب. لا ولاية بلا براءة وكل شي عند الله انحسب. ما تبرى من العصابة ويا ما يفيد العتب. ما تبرى من العصابة ويا ما يفيد العتب. فاطميون فاطميون الله الله در فراق تو بود شاه خراسان گریان. در فراق تو بود شاه خراسان گریان. در عزای تو همه عالم و آدم نالان. اشک ریزان غمت دیده جمله یاران. اشک ریزان غمت دیده جمله یاران. فاطمیون فاطميون صرخ. الله الله ظلمة والزهرة عصابة ما يعرفون السلم. ظلمة والزهرة عصابة ما يعرفون السلم. دفعة والباب على فاطم ما نعدهم عالزلم. دفعة والباب على فاطم ما الشاعر سلام البهادلي. ظلمة والزهرة عصابة ما يعرفون السلم. دفعة والباب على فاطم ما نعدهم عالزلم. ما نعدهم عالزلم. ذولا خلوا علي طاح وحيله كله من هدم. نصرخ ونلعن الظالم صوتنا ما ينكتم. نصرخ ونلعن الظالم صوتنا ما ينكتم. فاطميون فاطميون الله الله وميهمان آمد سویت به دل بشکسته. میهمان آمد سویت به دل بشکسته. گشته از کودکیم من به شما وابسته. گشته از کودکیم من به شما وابسته. از غم داغ شما گریه کنم پیوسته. از غم داغ شما گریه کنم پیوسته. فاطمیون الله وياك 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 الله وياك. انتهت عشرتنا انتهت عشرتنا. الدهر شتتنا وطفت شمعتنا. ويا زهرة شبيدي على فرقتنا. ويا زهرة شبيدي على فرقتنا. الله وياك الله وياك الله وياك. يا ثمرة عثقي ويا قصة عشقي. ويا ثمرة عثقي ويا قصة عشقي. ويا حب الصدقي بفرقتك أنا منوحا أحكي. بفرقتك أنا منونا حقي. الله وياك الله وياك الله ويا ما شاء الله الله وياك. اختلف كل وضعي اختلف كل وضعي حزين وأنعي. اختلف كل وضعي حزين وأنعي. دخيلك رجعي دخيلك رجعي. بغيابك عايش على الله ودمعي. بغيابك عايش على الله ودمعي. الله وياك الله وياك الله وياك الله وياك. جواب علي شي طيب كسري علي شي طيب كسري شي طيب كسري يا زهرة عمري. شي طيب كسري يا زهرة عمري. يا نسمة بصدري يا نسمة بصدري. انحفر مو قبرك يا ريته قبري. انحفر مو قبرك يا ريته قبري. الله وياك الله وياك الله وياك. شي طيب كسري شي طيب كسري يا زهرة عمري. شي طيب كسري يا زهرة عمري. يا نسمة بصدري يا نسمة بصدري انحفر مو قبرك يا ريت قبري انحفر مو قبري ويا ريت قبري الله وياك الله وياك برحيلك حيدر برحيلك حيدر دمع عين احمر برحيلك حيدر دمع عين احمر بمشيت اتعثر بمشيت اتعثر اشكبر هالدنيا لكن جرح اكبر اشكبر هالدنيا لكن جرح اكبر الله وياك بيت الدعاء بيت الدعاء يلا لا الله وياك يا راحة بالي يا راحة بالي بغيابك حالي يا راحة بالي بغيابك حالي بجالي خيالي بجالي خيالي يتيم خلافك مثل أطفالي يتيم خلافك مثل أطفالي الله وياك اللهم صل على فاطمة وأبيها وبعلها وبنيها والسر المستودع فيها يا الله. الشاعر حسين الدراجي أغات. اللهم نسألك وندعوك باسمك العظيم الأعظم الأعز الأجل الأكرم يا الله عجل لوليك الفرج واجعلنا من أنصاره وأعوانه والمستشهدين بين يديه. اللهم انصر المسلمين والإسلام واخذل الكافرين والكفار يا الله. اللهم تقبل منا هذا القليل واجعله ميزان حسناتنا لا تخرجنا من هذه الدنيا حتى ترضى عنا. أمتنا على ولاية أمير المؤمنين. اللهم شافي وعافي جميع المرضى لا سيما مرضى المنظورين ومن أوصانا بالدعاء. اللهم اقضي حوائجنا وحوائج المحتاجين من هذا الجمع. اللهم وفقنا لما تحب وترضى. المؤسسين لهذا المأتم الشريف تقبل اللهم أعمالهم ولأمواتهم وأمواتكم وأموات السامعين والجالسين والروح الطاهرة لفاطمة الزهراء والسيدة المعصومة. نهدي ثواب مجلسنا هذا وثواب سورة المباركة الفاتحة تسبقها صلوات فاطمية بأعلى الأصوات.